Good morning, Serena. Here we are at season 2, episode 1, talking
We
about blocks and barriers to change. How are
we
you,
did it.
lovely?
Yeah, I'm good. It's I always say that we pre-record these, so it's still the early part of the year, isn't it? And it just the last few days it's starting to feel a little bit like spring, but I think I might be a bit overly optimistic there. I'm
There
actually
is a
quite impacted by the weather. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we're going to be getting onto that, aren't we? Talking about our
Yeah.
environment, but yeah, weather. It does and it doesn't. I mean, I've got a whole spiel about winter. I'm one of those weirdos that really likes winter. I thrive December, January, November. I love the dark. I think
Oh.
it's because the dark helps me sleep, and I find summer too confronting, too much light, too much like exposure. And I think it's because I'm a bit of an introvert as well, so I do like feeling shrouded and invisible. I love that sensation. And also when you sit on the sofa in the evening, which I love to do, I have no guilt because it's dark outside and I actually
Right.
can't go out because not can't, but yeah, I'm not as drawn to going out in the winter. So yeah, there's a whole spiel there. But what I would
There
love to
is.
do is catch up with you and find out how you've
Oh.
been since our last recording.
Which we've had some lovely feedback on, I should say, shouldn't we? So thank you if you've emailed or messaged one of us. We've had some lovely feedback on that first series, so hence doing a second one, which we always planned on doing, but it's nice to know it might be resonating with people out there. I have been a very, very, very busy bee since we last got together to record this. So all the usual work that I will do, so still pottering away at university, teaching students there. I've got 10 research students this year, which is quite a lot to have. So seeing them through their research and all the ethics processes were kind of going around at Christmas. So that was a challenge. And then in my private practice, lots of really beautiful work that I've been concentrating on. So soon to be going to Dubai to teach healthcare professionals out there, which is amazing. As we're recording this, I'm just about to hit go on a really exciting project where I'm doing my first in-person behaviour change interventions course for healthcare practitioners, and that's going to be held in the Lake District.
Wow.
Very excited. And actually I should say that if anyone did listen to series 1, they would have heard me talk about Psych Lab, and I said I'd be launching that. So I held off on that launch actually, which feeds really nicely into the conversations that we have about behaviour change. So I changed how I was feeling about launching that. It didn't feel like the right time. So we talk about divine timing in the work that we do. And yeah, so I had to do some work myself on that and just kind of recognise that it wasn't the right time for me to launch a new project. So having to reframe everything actually and kind of do something that felt more aligned with what I wanted to do this year and not feel rushed into something. I think I ended up feeling quite rushed around Christmas to get that out. And I realised that I was possibly launching it for the wrong reasons. So I'm now more mindfully constructing my year. And that came about really as a result of my planning in the new year, which I mentioned. So
Mm.
when you're going into doing those beautiful goal setting exercises for the year, and I had a reframe of how I wanted my year to look.
Lovely. I
So
love that.
busy,
It,
busy. Thank you.
it just goes to show that I love how we bring the humanness into this, because I think sometimes there can be a misconception that behavior change is all about like overriding your natural humanness to become superhuman, to become like almost like this athlete or this individual that is high achieving, that can just like wear blinkers and go for it and override our natural human sensations. But it's not about that at all. It's about working with our cycles and our rhythms and how we're feeling and our reinterpretations of what's right for us based on seasonal stuff, based on who we are becoming, based on our relationships. There's so much that can affect our choices, and that can change. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that just because you are this person in September, it doesn't mean you have to say this to be this person in January. You know, I know from listening back to our conversation, especially the one around goal setting, and there's me not really enjoying goals and being a bit of a rebel, and you coaching me through that. And I was like, oh man, I really need to set some goals, but perhaps not call them goals. And so I've reframed them. I don't call them goals, I call them choices.
Oh, love it. You've
Which
taken
sort of,
ownership of that.
yeah, which sits better with me. And interestingly, since that whole episode and series, I am now doing Couch to 5K, which is really good. I'm loving that.
Well,
I'm really enjoying that. Enjoying my running. I've changed my personal trainer, and I'm really working on increasing my PB. And I have been doing intermittent fasting as well, which is typically something that I found really difficult and also not really in alignment with my beliefs around intuitive eating. But
yeah,
what
because you
I've
mentioned
realized,
that before. You mentioned that that's something that you were doing last time.
what intuitive eating?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I just found that I was spiraling. I found that I was like just not feeling good in my body. And although I wasn't stuffing my face left, right, and centre, there were cakes, there were chocolate, there were biscuits, there was a lot of nibbling through the day. And so I just decided that a really good time for me to make a change is on holiday, because I'm away from the office, I'm away from the kitchen, I'm not having to think about food as much. Um, and so I put a podcast on the plane all about intermittent fasting, especially for women. Thought, you know what, I'm going to do this, but I always do it in a way that is really where I'm listening to my body. So there's no way I would just jump into a kind of 16/8 fast. I just thought, well, let's start with fasting in between meals. Let's just not eat snacks if at all possible, because that's fasting. You know, stop eating breakfast, don't eat again until lunch. And I think I did that for about a month, and that was enough. And that really helped to like just gently move my body towards becoming a little bit more metabolically effective. And now I'm to a point where I'm able to not eat breakfast. I will have some protein in the way of a protein powder in the morning, and then not eat until 1:30 at lunch. So that has been a really interesting shift that I've been through. Of course, I've been hungry. Of course, I've wanted to eat, but I've got this like little trick that I do in my mind, which is all around like leaning into the hunger. So just like letting hunger be okay, like letting that sensation of hunger be okay, and it does pass, or I'll have a drink and it passes, and knowing that, oh, okay, if it's only another hour, it's only another 2 hours, I can do that. It's not the end of the world, and my blood sugar's nice and balanced now, so I'm feeling a little bit more in control, which is a nice feeling. And that feeling of control is really helping me to not want to break that habit, because I like that feeling. Maybe that's just my own sort of personality, and maybe that wouldn't work for other people, but yeah, it is a nice feeling that I definitely don't want to replace with guilt or a feeling of, oh, I've got to start this all over again, you know.
There's a couple of things there I want to pick up on that I think are
Sure.
really good for people to kind of zoom in on. One is, I love that you said that you're liking the way that you feel at the moment. And I think when you're looking at behaviour change, one of the things that is very difficult when you're starting to make a change is you're going through that really rocky period of kind of breaking out of that comfort zone. And we talked about that before, about how when you're making any change, really, when you're not hardwired to do it, even though you know you might want to make this change that is good for you, it inevitably comes with some kind of cost. So, it's challenging, it's difficult. There'll be literal costs associated with the specific change that you want to make. So for you, feeling hungry, feeling irritable, having the sensation of discomfort. But what you'll notice is, if your reason for doing it is intact and it's really meaningful to you and you can stick with it, that you do get past those levels of discomfort, and the reward becomes the thing that you're aiming for all along, the change that you wanted to make. And now that feels like it's a really good place to stay. And so the
Yeah.
change and sustaining the change feels easier. It doesn't
Yeah.
get completely easy, I don't think, over time. Some things do, some things become more habitual. But yeah, I just love that you've drawn attention to the fact that essentially, that feeling that something that was really hard to start with can end up being really rewarding down the line. Somewhere down the line, things switch. And like you said, now you
Yeah.
really like how you feel and you don't want to jeopardize that in any way.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say is I find it hilarious that you made a change on holiday, because
Really.
that would not be the case for so many people. It certainly wouldn't be for me. So for me, when I go on holiday, it's all bets are off. Like, you just like food, drink. That's my time to kind of go a little bit crazy and just not have anything that's stopping me from indulging. Or so it's just
Yeah.
so funny, because that for me is probably, I mean, unless something happened or something drastic happened, I can't think of why I would begin to make a change on holiday. But that's just
Yeah.
so interesting. Again, it just shows how different we all are.
Yeah, definitely. I can't believe I'm about to admit this, but
Oh, love it already.
I think there's a sense of, oh God, am I actually going to say this? There's a sense of, oh, I'm just trying to think of another word to use that doesn't make me look like an absolute narcissist.
Oh my God, now we all want to know what the word is. You're probably going to have to say it.
Okay, there's a sense of superiority.
Yeah.
Okay, when I'm on holiday and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
no, fuck this, I'm doing this. Like, I'm actually gonna, there's this buffet, everyone's loading their plates up with croissants and
Ah.
cheese and all this, like, the mountains of food. And I mean, I did eat well. I wasn't hungry, but wasn't eating loads of carbs. I wasn't eating loads of sugar, as I said. I would have more protein-based meals, but just that sense of, I had a sense of power. I had a sense that
Mm.
I had power. That's the word, power, not superiority. Let's just reclaim that quickly before,
Should we
yeah.
edit it out?
Yeah, there's just this sense of power, like, I'm in control here, I'm doing what's best for my body. And looking around at people who were really like indulging and thinking, my God, like, if that were me, I would feel like absolute shit. I know my body, like, they might not, because maybe their metabolism's different, whatever. I get that, everyone metabolizes food differently. But just that feeling of like, I don't want to feel lethargic. I don't want to feel sluggish. I don't want to feel like I'm bursting out of my clothes. I don't want to feel self-conscious about my belly whilst I'm laying around the pool. Not because I think there's anything wrong with existing in a larger body, not at all. We're all bodies are beautiful, all bodies are different. But for me, it's just that feeling of discomfort when I am not feeling in control of what's going on, really, both internally and externally, like with my behaviors. So yeah, and also I just think, when you're on holiday, you're not having to cook, you're not having to clean. And holidays for me are about well-being. Like, I go on holiday to restore, to feel better. This isn't the first time I've done something like this, by the way. And also I have an association where, when I was a child, I used to go to Sicily quite a lot, and there was food, and to the point of just gluttony and feeling so uncomfortable. So in a way, it's like me taking my power back against that enforced eating. So there's a bit of,
Mm.
like, trauma stuff going on there. So that's why I do it, because I want to
Mm.
feel well. And holiday is an opportunity to feel, to press the reset button and then come back and you start. It's easier to start on holiday and then come back, and then you've already got that momentum going when you're back.
I think this is a really lovely conversation to have because, again, it's highlighting, as we keep saying when we're focusing on behaviour change, which is the point of the whole podcast, which is how everything is so utterly individual.
Yeah.
Because actually, what you're saying there, in terms of, so I relate to some of what you've said, but so although I've maybe given a false impression that I go on holiday and I hit a bit of an effort button and just like indulge from morning till night, I think the difference for me is I have a like with that when it comes to exercise and eating, I have a baseline that never really changes even on holiday. So I will still exercise on holiday like I'm not like I would at home.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll still go to the gym in the morning or go for a run or do whatever I do. And then I probably for the most part still eat the same, but it is a little bit more indulgent. Like it's because you're there, so you'll have a few more drinks and I probably don't eat dessert during the week. I don't know, ever really. I don't really have desserts, but I might on holiday. It's that kind of indulgence for me. But I appreciate what you're saying that some people might go the whole hog and go completely to the other end of the spectrum. I just find it really fascinating because, again, the mindset I find about what you described is really fascinating because you want to start something there when you're away in a place where you feel really empowered, like you've taken some control back, and then you can bring that back and you're more able to sustain the change when you come home, is what you're saying. I just think so many people wouldn't relate to that way of doing it because, as you've alluded to, a lot of people they probably hit the button when they're on holiday and
Mm-hmm.
think, I will make all of those changes when I get home. And we've talked about this before. You can often set yourself up to fail when you do that, when it's this big all or nothing.
Yeah.
So actually, in some ways, if you want to make a significant change, like a lifestyle change in terms of health, eating, exercise, in some ways you are it's more powerful, and if you can have some kind of baseline that doesn't really shift too
Yeah.
much, you can kind
Yeah.
of riff within that structure that you've already got.
Yeah.
So it's less of this big transition, this constant transition. I think that really relates to that kind of diet culture. It's kind of going from one big way of eating to another big way of eating to another big way of eating versus just a very simplistic model of health.
Yeah. No,
So
I
that
agree with you.
actually, yeah,
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 absolutely agree. I think I do have generally a decent baseline. I've been
yeah,
doing this stuff for a long, long, long time. And I know for me to jump into something that's a little bit healthier on holiday, i.e.,
yeah.
not
I love
snacking,
that.
like not eating desserts, not eating ice creams, and that is quite easy. But I
Yeah.
appreciate that for someone who doesn't have that, it might just seem like absolutely bonkers.
I
Yeah.
think it's a lovely segue today into the main. So we have kind of been covering it already because today we decided to focus on blocks and barriers to change, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, we've kind of already kind of talked about this a little bit in the things that we're saying, in so much that I think some people would find it a barrier to change when they consider making a change on holiday unless something's happened. But it's interesting that there might be more people like you
Hmm.
that consider that a really good time to make a change, that being on holiday isn't a barrier to the change that they want to make.
Definitely doesn't
And
have
I
to be.
think, no, so when we're talking about blocks and barriers, we're really talking about obstacles or challenges or things that you think impede the process of you implementing some kind of change in your life.
Yeah.
What comes up for you initially when I talk about blocks and barriers? Do you have a reaction to what that looks like for you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, obviously, in my clinical work with my hypnotherapy clients, one of the main questions that I will ask somebody is, how ready do you feel to make this change? So people
Mm,
will often come with some huge problems, even things like lifelong anorexia. I haven't seen lots of those types of clients, but a few. Eating disorders, really deep rooted OCD type behaviors that are actually where there's a lot of secondary gain. a lot of secondary gain in terms of like, I do this behavior because I feel it gives me something that I feel I need because I don't have. Usually it's around protection, a feeling of protection, or a feeling of being in control, or a feeling of needing to feel important on the inside. So often when I ask them at the beginning, I will say to them, how ready do you feel to make this change on a scale of 1 to 10? Like if this were a story you've been just reading over and over again, how ready do you feel to rip up that story and start reading a new one? Most of the time people are like, oh my God, I'm so ready. I just need like a little push and I'll be fine. But a lot of people are like, well, like a part of me wants this, but there's another big part of me that doesn't want this. And so there's the resistance. So in the hypnotherapy sessions, I'm really interested in that part of them that self-sabotages. That's that part that sabotages. And so often I will speak to that part and ask it, let's give it a voice. So I want you to say, I'm the part of Helen who does this self-sabotage behavior, who can't stop eating or won't stop drinking. And the reason I'm in her life is because, and then I'll get them to put an ending on that sentence. So it's coming from them. Bearing in mind, we've also just done a load of regression. So they've seen their childhood and they're seeing what needs weren't met during their childhood and seeing why perhaps they've created this behavior that's been giving them so much, giving them a sense of empowerment, giving them a sense of self-importance, giving them a feeling of safety and connection. So why would they give it up? It's like you really have to acknowledge and understand the part of them that is stuck in the past. So in this trauma course that I'm doing at the moment, the trauma response that comes up now is really a response, part of the brain that is still stuck in the past that thinks that is going to happen or is happening now. And so in the work that I do, it's just about getting the subconscious and the body to recognize that is no longer happening. And we do this whole big thing around, looking at that scene in the past and going, that's not me anymore. I'm not that child stuck in that environment where I wasn't getting my needs met. I'm an adult now. And if I choose to stop this behavior, I can. And then it just becomes about the nuts and bolts. Well, how are we going to do that? And taking values-based action and all of that stuff that we spoke about in the last series. So for me, it's that the resistance, the blocks and barriers to change are often tied up with past narratives, past stories, not having a strong enough, also, this idea of not having a strong enough like internal voice as well, like what I call like the personal leadership voice, the cheerleader, the adult, the part of you that is the adult directing you in a way that you actually want to be directed. So I think they call it like cognitive dissonance, don't they, when you're that block is like a dissonant part of you that's not actually in alignment with yourself. So not knowing what your values are is such a big block. Also, I think we spoke about lack of education, like not knowing that something is even something that you could change or should change or would help you feel better. That's such a big one. I'm going to stop there.
Why is that? You're on a roll, time to go solo, as I say. I wasn't stopping you. That's fine. You can build a podcast.
I felt like I'd done. Go on.
You have said a lot there. There's a lot there that you said to unravel. So maybe if we go back to the start, because obviously a lot of this I agree with. I think actually what's lovely, and maybe it's a good time to say and draw attention to the fact that maybe you and I often speak in a different language and a different style, don't we? Because I come from that psychologist perspective and training, and you come from hypnotherapy. So it offers often a different way of looking at the same thing as well. So, I mean, certainly a lot of what you've said, I absolutely agree with and work on the basis of as well when it comes to change. I think I want to pick up on one of the first things that you kind of said way back at the start, which was great. And you talked about just kind of people having that resistance to change and that not everyone will. And I think I wanted to just say a little bit about that, because actually, obviously in the training I do, when I train healthcare professionals on behaviour change and I give them tools and strategies, one of the key things I actually teach is that not everyone will change. And actually, not everyone wants to hear that. I think people often come to a training or they come to a psychologist thinking that they'll be able to help them change everything, and I'll just give them a set of tools that will mean now they'll know what to do with their patients and their clients, and they just have missed this thing all along, and now I'm going to give it to them, and now everyone will do what they're supposed to do. And I always say in my training that human beings by nature are pesky. So if you're listening to this, know that I know that you're a pesky individual, because we all are. We just all are. If there are things that we don't want to do, we will find a way to not do it. And so in many ways, I think we can all relate to having that resistance to change, can't we? Because there would be things in our own lives that I'm sure we can all reflect upon and think about how resistant we were to making that change. If you go back to your childhood, what was it? What didn't you want to change? Maybe some things happened to you that were completely out of your control, like you'd rather not have had a sibling born, but damn it, they were born anyway. So suddenly this change was inflicted upon you and you've had to deal with it. Maybe having to move schools, maybe someone broke up with you, so all of those things that we encounter, the resistance to changing our diet or wanting to exercise. So I think we can all relate to having this resistance to change. And so when you think about how resistant you have been and what you have done to resist change, you are dealing with something ultimately very complex, because you will always find a way, which again highlights the control that you have over the change that you're making. If you don't want to do something, and this is what goes back to you, if you really don't want to do something, you will find a way to not do it. And so that's when we can reflect upon the work to help. If you want to make a change, for example, but you're finding it difficult, to go through it in more of a process-like manner to help yourself figure out why you feel stuck and why you can't make a change that you may feel you want to change, but you're struggling to make it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So again,
Yeah.
drawing upon something else that you've said as a tool there, which is kind of, you mentioned looking at the kind of costs and benefits. And again, that's a really powerful, it's such a simple exercise, but it's one that we can all do when we're trying to figure out a change for ourselves, is to look at the costs and benefits. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you might be rolling your eyes thinking, well, that's a really simple thing. We all look at the costs and benefits of making a change. But how I teach this exercise, I just want to offer it to you as something that you could do for yourself if you're struggling. And that is to look at, what I say is the costs and benefits and the costs and benefits. So it's dual focused. So in other words, look at the costs and benefits of making the change, but look at the costs and benefits of staying the same and doing nothing. And that's when it gets really juicy. Yeah. Because if you can stay with that dialogue and that conversation in your head long enough to figure out what the payoff is from not making the change, that's where the juicy stuff is.
Yeah.
And it then very much reflects how you've described the work that you've been doing with your clients, when you get someone to bring a voice to that part of them that is resistant to the change.
Yeah.
And if you're a practitioner, you can do that really simple exercise with your patients or clients and get them to figure out what the payoff is for staying the same and not making the change. And that's where the juicy stuff is, because they're going to have to tap into what it is that is comfortable and what it is that is appealing about not doing anything.
Yes.
And that's often where the magic is.
And that can often be where some shame comes up as well for a lot of people when they realise that. But also that could be a brilliant catalyst for making those changes. Often we'll get to a conclusion where somebody was doing a behaviour so that they could feel in control. But when they looked at it, actually doing that behavior was making them feel out of control. So even though they created it to make them feel in control, the reality was the complete opposite. So then they go, oh, they throw their hands in the air. Oh, I see it now so clearly. I thought I needed it because of X, Y, Z, because of the past. And I did need it then. I needed it then, but now I'm an adult. Now I'm, I realize I'm here and now. Of course I don't need it. Of course, and then I say, well, what would be better? And then they go into this big spiel about, but I think those like light bulb moments are so important for people. And your exercise that you referenced, the cost versus benefits, I've done that. I've done that with one of my singing students, actually, a professional musician who really wanted to improve his voice, and he wasn't practicing. And I knew he had so much potential, and we sat there and we did the cost versus benefits exercise, and my God, Serena, the difference in his voice now, he's just flying. Like, he's amazing. I'm so proud of this client. He's really stood the test of time and dug his heels in and done the work, even to the even when he's not felt like it, or when it's been embarrassing because other people have been in and they've been listening, and he's been able to just get over himself and do it because he's got his why really clear in his mind now. And because we did that exercise, we were there for an hour just pulling stuff out, it was amazing. So yeah, thank you for your brilliant exercise.
You're so welcome. Like I said, it's so simple, but it really helps just to get to the core of the issue. And if you can, it's a very brave exercise to do, to be honest. And it is something that you can do on your own for yourself, where if you can just be wholly and completely honest with yourself around, the costs and benefits of doing this thing I want to do, but what the costs and benefits from not doing anything at all. Because often when you're struggling, it goes back to that payoff of not doing anything being actually very appealing, the payoff being greater than what it feels like the cost would be to move forward and to make the change. And this links in really beautifully to some of the research that I've done, which I'm going to bore you with whether you like it or not.
Yes, please.
And it's looking at patients that I've worked with who were invited onto an exercise program. So this was done, I did some research for NHS Wales, basically, and we invited some people who were due to have a knee replacement. We invited them onto a strength-based exercise program, which also gave them a beautiful education around psychology. So I did all the psychology for the program, and we gave them some really useful advice on nutrition and other aspects that would help their overall health. And we invited patients onto the program, and we gave them this 3-month really novel strength-based exercise program as a precursor, so a pre if you like, intervention before they had a knee surgery. So the idea being that if they got really, really strong and really, really healthy, that they'd be in the best position for the surgery that they were going to have, because we know that surgical outcomes are much better if you're in a healthier place, essentially. So many people said yes to the program. Yes, please, I'd love to do it. And I interviewed those people, which was so interesting. So just to get to know them and their lives. But there were many people who said that they didn't want to do it. And I also got to interview them. Now that was where it got really interesting, because what I got to understand from interviewing them was why they didn't want to do the program. So you can imagine, this is going back to the very core of what we're talking about, and kind of this idea of, if something is going to help you, why would you not do it?
Yeah.
And so what I found in my research, and this is going to be published this year, you'll see it in a peer-reviewed journal, hopefully by the end of the year.
Amazing.
But one of the things that's come out of, just one of the things, if I just focus on one small aspect of what was really interesting, was this very clear identity around victim. So again, this is touching upon a previous episode where we talked about the identity that you hold of yourself and how strong that can be and how difficult that can be to change that identity. And so what I found with this particular group of people was their identity was very interwoven with a very strong narrative around the injury or the problem that they had, and they were unwilling to shift that.
Yeah.
So, in the face of any opportunity that came their way or any ability to problem solve it, they would push the problem solving back on you, and actually they would stay very fixed in their story, which
Yeah.
actually meant that they were very rigid in their thinking and unwilling to see the opportunities that were in front of them. And for some of those people, I think working with them psychologically would help them shift it.
Yeah.
It would actually help them work on the things that we're talking about. So to be able to have transparent conversations around what the payoff might be for them, how might things look if they were to step into that future identity of themselves that was pain-free. This actually is when we're touching upon things like motivational interviewing techniques as well. So if anyone listening hasn't heard of that, it's not something that we'll discuss today, but it's just a technique. It's another tool that you can use to elicit change in the person that you're working with. But I imagine a lot of those people, Sally, would never want to do anything, if I'm honest. They are the payoff of staying in the identity of victim, so you don't understand me, was too great. There was too much that they got from staying where they are. So again, when you think about that for yourselves, if you're listening to this, I'm not suggesting that you're doing this, but if you just take on and consider for a moment that actually there's a lot to give up for people sometimes, and that's why they might not make a change. So what is it that they're getting? It might be that not only does it mean they don't have to do anything, but they get to tell their story to everyone. They get to be a person who gets attention. There's a lot of payoff. There's a lot of very subtle things that are a payoff to staying as you are.
They get to be right. And this
They
is
get to be
something
right.
this is something that comes up, and when you trace it back into their past, if their emotional needs, if their sense of authenticity was cast aside, or if they were ignored a lot of the time, or if, say, for example, they had a controlling parent who kind of dampened down their voice or their sense of identity, for them, having some kind of, or being right about something, like imagine being a child and just always being made wrong. No, you're wrong.
Mm.
No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Like trying to have an opinion about something and then that being cast aside. And when you get to adulthood and you are in this pretty, I don't know, in this state where things aren't going very well for you, but you can be right about it. You can be right about the state of the world. You can be right about all of the injustices. And of course, there are injustices. I'm not saying there aren't, but there's also agency. We can also change our perspective. We can also do things to help ourselves. This is why I had to stop myself going down the kind of woke pathway, and I went
Oh,
down it for
interesting.
about a year and a half, I think. I needed to. I found it very validating, but I got to a point where I found it quite depressing. And I became really depressed, actually. It was like August last year. And I thought to myself, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I can't, because it's taking all my power away. And if I really go down that rabbit hole and see that I have no power because of all of these toxic systems, then
Right.
what the fuck? like I might as well just
Can
go
you
and
can you say a little bit more about what that looked like for you and why that relates to what we're saying in the way that you've described it? So what was it about how the woke community were behaving that endowed you with that feeling? What was it about how they were functioning or saying?
Well, it was a lot of talk around oppression
Right.
and systemic oppression, and I get that there is. I get that poverty is a real thing, racism is a real thing, ageism is a
Mm.
real thing. All these isms, ableism, all of it, it's real.
Mm.
But I got to a point where I just had to protect myself, and
Mm.
maybe that is my privilege. Maybe that is, I throw my hands up. But I went some of the way to doing the work, that kind of unraveling, taking my lenses off and my biases off to kind of wake myself up to my privilege. but got to a point where it was, as I said, making me feel quite depressed.
Thank you, first of all, so much for sharing something so personal. I always think you do such a great job for us both sharing, because I'm really rubbish at sharing things about myself. So thank you for taking it for the team.
to my detriment.
It's not. It's beautiful. It's just that things about me don't. I think it's my psychologist training.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. So, nothing about the self should come to the table. So maybe I'll get over this as the podcast goes on. I have shared a bit. But what I want to touch upon, and I actually think this is a whole other episode, because we need to just really think about how we navigate what I think would be a very, very delicate conversation. But I would love to know from people after this episode whether they'd like for us to cover this, which is the idea of labeling and diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a diagnosis, if you're given a diagnosis and you have now a label, so because you were talking about all these things that are like the labels that we can have,
Mm-hmm.
That I'm experiencing this and I'm experiencing that. So that means I cannot do anything. I have no agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think labeling and diagnosis can go both ways as well. So by being given a diagnosis, it can provide you a freedom to change. Because now you've a stake in the ground, and now we can do something about it, and we have the ability to research and be in action. Or it can leave you stagnant and stuck because, do you know what? I've got this wrong with me. I can't do anything about it. Does that make sense? So it can go either way. So I think a whole episode maybe on labeling and diagnosis and how that relates to our ability to change might be really quite powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I finish what I was going to say about the victim? Because you were talking about the identity. Yeah, the identity around victim and this whole thing of being right. So what I do with my clients is get them to flip that switch and get them to say, okay, well, what else can you be right about? Could you be right about your amazing ability to make a shift? Could you now be right about your incredible body that has self-healing properties if you gave it the right environment to find health within your body? Could you be right about that? So I get them to switch that around for their own empowerment, because it is a thing. Victim mindset. I don't like the word victim mentality because it pokes at that part of me that did all that, sort of went down that woke pathway. It's like, we shouldn't really say that. We really shouldn't, because some people are victims. I've been victimized by I won't even go there, but I have been the victim of some really nasty stuff. So it's not to say, it's like, it's what I did with that though that makes the difference.
It also is a bit semantic, isn't it? It's what the word victim means to you. So what is your definition of victim? And for me, certainly with the conversation we're having, it's a shortcut because we kind of know what that means.
Yeah.
It's essentially, in this sense that I'm describing it, it's this idea that things happen to you.
Right.
And actually, there are things that happen to us. And to have the self-awareness, so going back to another episode, in the last series, when you have the self-awareness to really observe that and know where that comes from, and not everyone will have, look at the state of the world today. Things happen to people, and there are many, many people that are in situations where they have no agency over what's happening to them, depending on where you are born in the world. That in itself determines so much. The gender that you're born with, or I should say the sex, or however you want to look at this, the colour of your skin, so many things. In many ways, you have no control over, therefore, what happens to you. But there will be a big portion of those people that have control over what they do with that.
You're right.
Some people will have more agency over their ability to to make changes as a result of that. And that will start with mindset. And actually, this leads really nicely onto something else I wanted to talk about with in regards to this conversation about barriers to change. And that is just having the resources to make the change in the first place. It's a very practical part of behaviour change. And it can often be a barrier to change. So, and by resources, I mean just having the necessary means to make the change that you want to make. Do
Yeah.
you have the tools, the training, the technology, the money, the time? So do you have the resources you need to make the change that you're setting yourself up for? And
Yeah.
that links kind of to what we were saying before, is that not everyone will have those things, but if you do, and you're in a situation, you live somewhere in the world, you're fortunate enough to be in a situation where you have the ability to tap into those resources, then arguably you do have the ability and you have more agency over your ability to make the changes that you might want to make.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise those the limitations that we have, but also what we can do within our limitations. Because, you know, when I was doing my songwriting degree, I know I refer back to this, but one of the I don't know if I'd mentioned this before, but one of the things that our songwriting teachers used to say is that limitation breeds creativity. So if you limit yourself to three
Mm.
chords, two instruments, like what can you do with that one theme? So you're not clutching at
Mm.
straws around lyrics and what's this song going to be about? Choose one thing. And my God, the creativity that comes out of
Mm-hmm.
limitation is actually quite amazing, because you're squeezing the juice, aren't you? It's like essential oils. When you compress, when you take everything else out, what you're left with is the essence. And the essence, you know, it's just quite spiritual, but the essence
Yeah.
is, you know, the stuff that we're made of, our will, our determination, our imagination. And I think we can do so much with that.
I also say that very much links to human beings. So often it's people with so few resources that are the most creative.
Yeah.
They, you know, have very little in terms of money or food or other resources, and yet they're able to make that go a really long way and be very, very welcoming in
It
terms of
reminds
what they offer you.
Right,
Mm.
exactly. I always think about the pyramids in Egypt and how, you know, they didn't have as much technology as we have today, yet they were able to build all these monumental temples, these statues,
Mm.
these pyramids. I mean, some people think they were aliens down from outer space. I don't know, they might be. With all of this
Let's not go
superior,
there.
yeah, like thinking along the lines of that they're not aliens from outer space. What they did, you know, that supports our argument, doesn't it? That creativity is born out of limitation.
Mm. I think there's something to be said as well, and we have to always go back to that individual when we're looking at this, and think about what might be perceived as a barrier to someone that you're working with, because, you know, it's going back to the idea that we don't know what we don't know about someone. So if you're working with someone else, so there's something called the health belief model. So it's something that you might use when you're looking at behaviour change in a healthcare setting, and certainly perceived barriers to change is something that you would look at. So it's that person's perception of what is in there, what's stopping them from changing. You know, what's their perception of what's stopping them from changing. And so if you're doing this again for yourself, to look at what you perceive as barriers to your change. Because if you think about it, and actually I was just talking about this the other day. So I feel like I'm crowbarring this in, and it feels really, really like egotistical. But I just did a TV program the other day for Channel 5, and I was asked to talk about helping people make changes around their lifestyle. And one of the things I said was, be prepared. So if you're going to make a change, what can you do to set yourself up in the best possible way to make that change? And part of it is very simply preparation. So if you are looking at a change, going back to what I was saying before, if you're looking at a change that you want to make yourself, part of your preparation is taking time to address what you perceive the barriers to be before you set out to make the change, so that you can do whatever it is you feel you're able to take those barriers away and to make things easier for yourself. So for example, if it's as simple as eating healthy foods, it's not rocket science. It's, you know, what's a barrier? Well, a barrier will be is if I keep all the same food in my cupboards that I've had up until now, which is unhealthy, and all the snacks are really unhealthy. You know, to set myself up for success, I want to take that barrier away. And it means being prepared. It means having healthy foods in. It means meal prepping. It means thinking about what I'm going to eat for the week. You know, a lot of psychology is not, it's not, you don't go to NASA to study this. It's just like, it's really very logical stuff. It's what can you do to set yourself up for success? What is a barrier to you that's going to stop you from achieving this thing? And so to be prepared and to, you know, that inadequate planning is something that really feeds into our inability to make the change.
Yeah, definitely. I like to have a contingency plan as well. So if, like, at the weekend, we went up to London on Saturday, and I thought to myself, you know what? There's going to be ice cream shops, there's going to be luxury cake shops that I'm passing, and okay, I'm going to need a contingency here. So I know for me, nuts are really good. So if I eat nuts, it really stabilizes my blood sugar. I don't get cravings. So trying to get ahead of those cravings, really, really important, by, you know, making sure that I've got what I need. And if I haven't, make a choice to go into Marks and Spencer's and get some, rather than being lured into these like fancy shops that you just want to kind of sit there and be part of. Making sure you're hydrated enough, you know, that's really important as well. But thinking about what the pitfalls are going to be. And I think military guys do this. That's really sexist, isn't it? Military people do this when they're planning wars. Don't even go there, love.
I thought you were woke.
I'm trying. Yeah, so it's all contingency. So I think, you know, when you're planning a big operation of some kind, what you will do is sit there and you will be with your teammates. You'll be thinking always, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? What could go wrong? Which is not pessimistic. You know, if you're building a new building, for example, a massive piece of engineering, you're always going to be thinking, what can go wrong? They employ people just as, I don't know what they're called, like they're professional problem solvers. They are there to focus on solving the problem, and they're always asking that question. And I think we can take a leaf out of their book and go, right, okay, how can I prepare? So love that you brought that up.
And it feeds so nicely into some future episodes, because for me, this is about also building resilience. Yeah. And resilience is needed when we're doing this work. So the more resilience we can build into the nature of being human, the more powerful we are. And actually, so maybe we save that for some future episodes, because actually I was going to start to talk about people, because people play a part here, but let's save that for the next episode, and hopefully people want to come back and see what we're going to say all about how people can also help us on this journey of change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Serena. Thank you. I hope I haven't painted myself in too much of a bad light here with saying that I'm morally superior to everyone else on holiday.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Keep it coming, Sally.
Needs to do an ego check.
No, and you don't at all. I certainly also think there's loads more about barriers and blocks that we can cover. But again, these episodes are not exhaustive. It's about us touching upon some of the key things, but there's always so much to say about this juicy topic. But I am biased, which is why we're doing the podcast. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much as well, Sally. Love it. Keep it coming.
Thanks, Serena.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye. I can't. Yeah. I can't remember the music. I do like the intro and outro, I have to say.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's really good.
Yeah, thank you
for finding
it.
Shall
Yeah,
I do
go
it
for it.
or?
You've got the radio voice, so.
Oh, you've frozen.
Oh, you're frozen again. Oh no.
It's all right.
You're
I think we'll
back.
just keep going.
Yeah, go.